Hello aspirants and welcome again to Legacy IAS Academy. Here we continue with our free series of UPSC Mains 2025. So as you all know, we'll be discussing the mains relevant topic from the perspective of mains examination. In fact, the upcoming mains examination. So it's very important for the 2025 aspirants, and of course the aspirants who might give the attempt later on can also of course learn from this. So the topic that we will be taking up today is effects of liberalization on the economy. Now, liberalization is a word, so this liberalization, what effect it has had on the economy is what we will see. An exactly similar sentence is actually mentioned in your syllabus. So let's trace this topic first in order to understand from where it is. Of course, it's from the economic development or Indian economy. It is in GS3. In GS3 you have economic development, and under that you can see that there is effects of liberalization on the Indian economy, changes in industrial policy and their effects on industrial growth. So this is where this topic is coming from, as it is mentioned in your syllabus. So let us start with this. First things first, what is liberalization? Now, very importantly, till some years back, a lot of questions with respect to economy, polity, etc. were majorly analytical. Now also analytical ability is required, analytical questions are there, but UPSC now has come up with a lot of questions wherein the first part of the question is quite factual in nature. It's a small part but factual in nature, and then the second part becomes analytical. For example, the question on potential GDP. So first they will ask potential GDP and then they will ask how does it impact the economy, the world, whatever it is. In the same manner here also they can simply directly ask what is liberalization, discuss its impact since 1991 on the Indian economy. So second part is the major one wherein you will discuss in detail, but the first part is factual. Why am I emphasizing on this? That is because do not stop revising or remembering things and thinking that okay, just the analysis will be more than enough. No, that is of course the main part, but you should still know certain things. Now here, liberalization and all, any serious aspirant might easily be knowing that. However, there can at times be certain terms which might need a lot more detailed factual information. Now that does not mean you keep on mugging up and remembering a lot of things. That's when we come in, that we focus on those things which are specifically mentioned in our syllabus. So let's continue. What is liberalization? So understanding first what is liberalization. Now here also understand, in your answers you need not necessarily write the bookish definition. In fact, it will be better if you avoid it, so that it is understood that it's not a bookish mugged up definition that you are writing, but you are writing by your conceptual understanding. So what is liberalization? Anything that is liberated. Right, so if something is liberated, that means you are setting something free. That means previously it was not free. That means previously there were restrictions. So when on anything, on anyone, if there is a restriction and later on that restriction is completely removed or lowered, reduced, that is the process of liberation or liberalization. Here we are not talking in terms of polity or freedom of speech or anything, or choice or person's choice, etc., but with respect to the economy. So what is going to happen here? When you say liberalization, it is the economic liberalization. So what is going to happen here is economic liberalization. So and in context of India, of course. So the Indian economy, which was previously restricted, there were huge numbers of rules and regulation imposed on the Indian economy. Later on, you see specifically the watershed point here is the year 1991. Subsequent to 1991, those regulations, restrictions have been reduced, lowered, as a result of which the economy liberalized, and that is what is liberalization. It is what? The process of reducing or eliminating. As I said, you can either completely remove or you can reduce. So has there been complete elimination in case of India? Absolutely not. But yes, there has been a considerable reduction in case of India. So the process of reducing or eliminating what? The restrictions. Now the restrictions is what we are talking about. In this case, it's the government restrictions which are there. Of course, we are ruled by a government, we are governed by a government rather, so that government imposes certain restrictions. Now, why is that the case? Because India is a mixed economy. Now, what is mixed economy? Economy, of course, can be market economy, economy can be state economy, or economy can be a mixed economy. In market economy, as you should know, that it is the market forces of demand and supply which determine what to produce, how much to produce, whom to sell, how to sell, at what price to sell. In state economy, it is the state or the government that completely decides it, whereas in a mixed economy, what happens is it takes the positives of both market and state and tries to eradicate the negatives of both market and state. So what is the positives of a market economy? The positive is there is no government interference, the market demand and supply is deciding the prices and everything in the market. But the issue is, since the demand and supply is deciding the prices, there might be cases wherein the last person standing in the queue, the person who is poor, might not get the benefit reached to them. That is why the state intervenes. So the state comes in, but in a state economy, complete state authority is there. So the positive is, because the state is intervening, if the state is good, the poor people would also be provided with benefits. But on the flip side, what can happen is, let's say, since the government is deciding what to produce, how much to produce, the entrepreneurial tendencies might lower down. Just for example, if I want to start a business, but the government decides what business should I do. And let's say I decided to do a business of manufacturing football, but then the government is deciding how many footballs should I produce. So they are restricting my temperament with entrepreneurial temperament that is there. So creativity might go down, the expansion might go down, the production itself might go down, and basically the incentive to start a business might itself reduce. So that is the issue in the state economy. So the mixed economy tries to address both the issues by allowing things to take its own course with the help of the demand and supply in the market. But if the private player tries to basically exploit or profiteer, that's when the government chips in and puts in a ceiling price or certain regulations, restrictions or regulations on the individual or the companies in order to ensure that the consumers are not harassed, exploited and taken for granted. So this is why mixed economy, and India does have mixed economy. So though the rules and regulations are not as strong or restrictive as a state economy, but they are still there. And they themselves were quite stringent at times and restrictive in nature. So here, when we are talking about eliminating the restrictions, it's the government restrictions that we are talking about on what? On the business and commerce. So the reduction or complete elimination of government restrictions on the private businesses or commerce is known as liberalization. You are basically breaking free your business from the huge amount of government control. Alright, so in India it has not been completely broken free, still government control is there, but to a huge extent it has been lowered. Now when did this financial reform, that is liberalization, start in India? It started in the year 1991. Now why did it start? You can argue that it was not something that we planned to do or maybe wanted to do or have been planning since long. No, there were reasons that we have to start it. One of the reason, or in fact the reason over here was balance of payment crisis that India faced. So because there was balance of payment crisis in India, we had to go and borrow funds. We have to borrow foreign exchange, and we went to the IMF, that is International Monetary Fund, to borrow money. And when we went there, they gave us certain rules, regulations, guidelines, criteria based on which they will transfer us funds. So we have to abide by them. And one of the things that they asked us to do is to liberalize our economy. Now, in 1991, because of the guidelines of the IMF, India had to take LPG reforms. What is this LPG reforms? L stands for liberalization, P is for privatization, and G is for globalization. So here we are talking about, we are more interested in liberalization because we are doing this particular topic. So liberalization was a part of this LPG reform, and we were required to do it because of the balance of payment crisis that were there. Now, what is balance of payment crisis? To understand that, first we need to understand what is balance of payment. So any country would be trading with other countries. So a country, let's say for example us, we, India would be exporting goods and services to other countries, various countries, and importing goods and services from various countries. So let's say to USA we export goods worth of goods and services worth of $500 billion and import goods and services worth of $300 billion. So we will have a trade surplus. Means what? Our exports are more than our imports. But that need not necessarily be the case with all the countries, and overall that need not necessarily be the case. When we have a trade surplus, that's not a problem, because when we are exporting more and importing less, what will happen is, when we export more, we will get more foreign exchange, and since we are importing less foreign exchange we have to give to the other countries. So we will have a surplus of foreign exchange. But in the reverse scenario, when the import is higher than the exports, then what will happen is, we will have to give more foreign exchange to the other countries and we will receive less. So we will have a deficit, which is known as the deficit balance of payment. Now here we have a deficit of foreign exchange. We cannot simply start printing foreign exchange. If it was Indian rupees, we would have, but even that would not be advisable because that is highly inflationary in nature. So what do? We can't even print. Even printing would have been highly inflationary, but we can't even print. So we have to borrow foreign exchange. Who will give us? So we went to the International Monetary Fund. Now remember, just because we have a deficit need not necessarily mean that we are in crisis and we have to borrow. Why? Because we can have a deficit, but there can be huge amount of reserves with us to pay for that deficit, which is these foreign exchange reserve is kept by the Reserve Bank of India, that is RBI, who is the custodian of India's foreign exchange. So if India's RBI, that is Reserve Bank of India, for example, has huge amount of reserves, which it has right now, at that time it was not there. So if RBI has huge amount of foreign exchange reserve, then there is no problem, you can pay for that deficit. But if the RBI also does not have any foreign exchange reserve and your import bills are increasing, you are in a deficit, you don't have money to pay, that's when the situation gets converted into a crisis. If there is a deficit, it is just that there is a deficit in the balance of payment. So yes, balance of payment is there, but it becomes crisis only when you don't have the foreign exchange to pay for that. So we didn't have it. We had foreign exchange worth for just 2 to 3 weeks of imports. So we were in a very dire situation. Now what would have happened if we would have not got this loan? So a lot of people would answer good points. Yes, that economy would have slowed down, price increase, this, that, everything is fine. But a very important thing to note here is, if we would not have been able to import, so many compulsory imports would not be possible, including crude oil, for example, which is required for our safety and security. The aircraft, the tankers, the use of armed forces, materials, etc. All these military equipment, etc. are requiring crude oil and various other things to function. And if we don't have it, the entire machinery, the army would come to a standstill to an extent which will hamper the sovereignty, security and safety of the nation. Apart from that, of course, various economic issues would also be there. As a result of which, we went to the IMF and borrowed money in order to address this situation. Now the question is, what were the reasons of this balance of payment crisis? Number one was the fiscal shortfall. What is fiscal shortfall? If generally you have to understand is, see, the government has a receipt. They receive some money and they spend some money. So the government's receipt is basically the revenue receipt plus the capital receipt. This is the total receipt of the government, right? So this minus the total expenditure basically is what you have to take into account. There is a specific definition if you have to, but since we are in mains, you can generally also write the difference between the, let's say the receipt and the expenditure. But if you have to be specific, specifically it will be like your total expenditure, which is the revenue expenditure plus the capital expenditure, right, minus, instead of total receipts, you cannot write total receipts, you have to subtract one part. So fiscal deficit will be equal to total expenditure minus revenue receipt plus, not capital receipt, but that part of capital receipt which does not create any debt, which is known as non-debt creating capital receipt. Now this is what fiscal deficit is. Now the target for this fiscal deficit is 3.5% is an acceptable amount. The fiscal FRBM Act, Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act of 2003 mandates that your fiscal deficit should be within the limit of 3%. But what happened over here is our fiscal deficit was approximately 8.4%. It is closing in on to triple then what is acceptable. So that means we are spending a lot and the earning is quite less. So that is one issue. The next was the Gulf War that was going on. What was the Gulf War that we are talking about? Iran at the time had invaded Kuwait, and that started the Gulf War. Why? The reason that Iran gave is that saying that Kuwait was basically drilling oil, was producing crude oil to a huge extent, which was making the prices to fall down, as well as Kuwait was drilling in a slant manner, in an inclined manner, as a result of which the drill is going directly into their into their region. Instead it is going into the other region which they do not own, which is not theirs. So they are drilling crude oil from other places as well with the use of this technique. So these were the concerns with respect to which because of which Iraq has basically invaded Kuwait. And then of course USA and all also got involved. There was retaliation. At one point of time Kuwait was declared as the 19th province of Iraq. However, after US's involvement it was taken back, and this 19th province was short-lived and Kuwait became an independent country. So that was the Gulf War, because of which crude oil prices are also going up, and India imports crude oil since the prices will go up. Now initially Kuwait was producing more, which would have brought down the prices, but when this Gulf War started, things come to a standstill, production goes down, prices goes up. Since India imports, our import bill increases, as a result of which we have to pay even more amount of foreign exchange, as a result of which more need of foreign exchange will be there. Then high inflation, the prices were also increasing. See, prices, if crude oil prices increase, generally all other prices also increase. Why? Because when crude oil prices is increasing, all the goods needs transportation, needs logistics, which requires crude oil, even if you are importing again. So this will ultimately lead to inflation. It led to inflation, and inflation existed. So that means you have to again spend more. So because of this, the situation of India was such that it led to the balance of payment crisis. I hope that's clear. Now, how was this liberalization implemented? To implement liberalization, not just liberalization alone, liberalization, privatization and globalization. These three things were being implemented, but talking about liberalization alone, see, the government announced the new economic policy of 1991, which helped to implement the liberalization. So new economic policy of 1991 had the goal of liberalization, privatization as well as globalization. Now, what was the goal? What were the goals of liberalization? Now here you might find a lot of things overlapping. Overlapping in the sense that see, what are the other things? They reinforce each other as well. So for example, liberalization. This is important. This is very important in your answer writing, how you can talk about the overlapping and the synergy and things reinforcing each other. So when liberalization is there, that means rules and regulations are going down. Less and less rules and regulation, ease of doing business is increasing. So what will happen? More private players would want to do business, which would then lead to more and more privatization of things. Provided, of course, the government is allowing privatization. If the government is allowing privatization in that domain, then more and more people would want to do the business in that domain because the things are easy, so privatization increases. In the same manner, since rules are easy to follow, very less restrictions, etc., foreign countries companies would also want to work in India, as a result of which globalization would also be given a positive boost over here. So in your answers you can mention, depending upon the demand of the question, that liberalization can solidify, can boost, can help or positively impact globalization and privatization as well. I hope that's clear. So what are the goals? Goals to make it possible for Indian economy to become global. How to do that? Liberalize, rules and regulations diluted, not much stringent. Other countries' companies would also want to deal with India, deal in India, work in India, work with India, establish its firm in India, so on and so forth. Next, in order to boost exports, encourage nations' foreign trade. In order to boost exports, encourage nations' foreign trade. Now, how can you boost exports by liberalization? See, if the terms are soft, not stringent, more people would want to produce. When more people produce, the internal demand will be met first, and when the internal demand is met, the additional surplus can be further exported, so India can do well in export also. Why are we not exporting much of so many things? Because internal demand itself is there, so it gets consumed internally only. So what can we do? Should we stop selling internally and export, but then people in India will not get it, right? Which will lead to increase in the prices and hence inflation. So even that is not possible. So you have to increase the production to an extent that that domain also becomes an export oriented domain, right? So that will help with, that will happen with increased productivity. Then to find a solution to India's problem with balance of payments, when you are exporting more, you will earn more foreign exchange, as a result of which your balance of payment situation is going to improve. Previously you were having a high amount of deficit, now the deficit will reduce. At one point of time there might even be a surplus of balance of payment. Then to increase the private sector involvement in India's economic expansion, very important. See, government alone can only do so much, because even the government's budget of course is restricted. So the government wants the private player also to be involved, so that private player, when it is involved, the development can be at a faster pace. This is going to not just help in India's economic expansion, this is going to increase the pace of the expansion and development as well. This will lead to faster development of India. Then to increase direct investment from abroad in the Indian industry. When some people do not want to open industries but would rather want to invest. So they would of course want to invest in a country wherein business is facilitated, because that's when the business has a higher chance of success. I hope that's clear. Then to promote competition between domestic businesses as well. Investment, foreign companies are also coming, so Indian companies would also want to do better and better, and more Indian domestic companies are also coming, so that will lead to more and more competition. Imagine there is just one company producing pen, there is no competition. They will sell at whatever price they want, they will give you whatever quality they want. But if there are thousands and thousands or hundreds, even hundreds of companies, there will be competition. You want to outdo others, you will provide better quality at cheaper price, so on and so forth. So the end consumer is happy, the economy is happy, because the production has increased, the economy is running smoothly. So these are your goals of liberalization. Now, goals are clear. Now let us understand the effects or the impact of liberalization. So what are the impacts of liberalization is what we'll understand here. Increased economic growth. Very clear. There was significantly, or at least I would say definitely, increase in economic growth, which can be seen in that from 1991 to 2020, India's GDP grew at an average of 6.7%. That is quite a high growth rate when you are averaging out. You know what is India's growth rate right now? 6.4%. So here the average itself is higher than our present growth rate, because the economy at certain times have grown at 8% plus as well, which is a good growth number. We do want to aspire for double digit growth, but this is also quite good. At the same time, it seems even better when you compare. So these are 3 decades over here. If you compare this with the 3 decades previously, you will realize the average growth rate was 3.5%. So almost half. So the growth rate has sort of doubled, right? These facts, you can introduce your answer using these kind of facts in your mains answers. Next is higher foreign investment. Foreign investments has increase multifold. It was in millions previously, now it is in billions. So if you look at it, 1990 it was 98 million. That means 0.098 billion. 1 billion is how much? 1 billion is equals to 1,000 million. So it's just 0.098. It's not even 1 billion, and now here we are talking about approximately 82 billion of foreign investment. So that there has been a considerable increase. Improvement in industrial productivity. Of course, improvement, because earlier, before liberalization, there was a concept of, you can write it down, it's important, the concept of license, quota, permit, Raj. So earlier there was license, quota, permit, Raj. Now it's very important to understand here. You might feel that yes, license should be required. Yes, agreed, license should be required. But do you require license in everything? You want to open a small shop which is not hazardous in nature. It has nothing to do with alcohol, social issue kind of a thing, or polluting thing. You want to open a stationery. Do you need, or factory which produces, let's say paper, not paper, even a easier thing, let's say any food production, etc. So do you need licenses for that? Now licenses, in certain things you need it. If you are producing certain hazardous chemicals, atomic energy, there is a monopoly of only the government in atomic energy. If you are producing any tobacco substance, alcohol, licenses are needed, but not in everything. So only in specific cases licenses should be there, everything else should not require license. But earlier a lot of things required license and permits to produce it. At the same time, very important here to notice the quota. Now what is the quota? Even if I get a license, there will be a quota up to which I can produce. So they will say you can produce only 100 tons. Now in producing 100 tons, it may not help me. Imagine we open a UPSC institute and the government says you can enroll only 2 students. Now if we enroll only 2 students, maybe the budget for this digital board and for so many faculties that we have, we may not be able to have that budget. A single person might have to teach all the things, even though they are not good in certain things. We might have to hire teachers at very cheap rate, in the sense that then who will come and teach? The teachers who may not have that experience, so on and so forth. Or at the same time, what will happen is you will have to dilute on so many things. At the same time, your business may not have economy of scale, because only 2 students you can enroll or 10 students you can enroll. So where is the incentive for you to start a business? It's gone. So there was quota also. Now that quota is gone. So now the economies, or let's say the companies, will produce as much as they want. So the production will of course increase. Expansion of the services sector. The services sector expand, and presently we have close to 55% share of services sector in GDP. Earlier it was less than 40, around 37%. Then increase in consumerism. This is a negative thing at some point of time, but also positive. It helps join the economy, increase the demand, the economy works well, creates jobs, etc., etc. But too much of consumerism should not happen. That can lead to be negative. Completely involved in consumerism, the social life, the personal life, all these gets affected. But that is a different social issue. Here consumerism as in production had increased, the choices with people was more, so people were trying new and better, improved and more things, as a result of which helping the economy as well. Now when you talk about impact can be positive as well as negative. The impact that we have seen so far was positive, but there are certain negative impacts as well. What are they? Widening of income inequality. So a lot of people were coming out of poverty, but the rich getting richer and poor getting poorer was also happening. You can see from the data that top 1% of India held 22% of the country's wealth, and now if you talk about, they are holding over 40% of India's wealth. So inequality has increased. See, because why that happens is because whenever there is opportunity, someone who is situated in a better position in the society will be able to take the advantage. People at the lower rung may not be able to take advantage, as a result of which the disparity still widens. So that has happened. Job losses have also happened because if you talk about globalization, transferring of technology, technological advancement, labor power required is less, your labors are not skilled, so jobs are not there, as a result of which the joblessness, which was reported by economic survey that the unemployment rate in India has increased, and it led to also jobless growth in India. Now you can link the two topics that are there. Now further increased poverty. Of course, poverty was, people were getting out of poverty, but the rate of reduction of poverty was decreasing, and it was becoming sort of stagnant. So it is not that poverty suddenly increased too much, it is just that the rate at which the poverty was declining, that sort of stagnated and in fact lowered as well because of this. Further environmental degradation, simply because more production, higher production, faster production, right? So more carbon footprint, degradation of environment, so on and so forth. Further, dependence on foreign investment. As we know that yes, we are getting huge amount of foreign investment, but because of that our dependence has been put on foreign investment. Now we have been now dependent on it. So liberalization majorly overall is a positive thing. We saw a lot of positive, but there were certain negative, certain more things can be done going forward. What can they be? Simplify and streamline the tax system. Take an example of Vodafone. Now it's Vodafone Idea, but earlier when it was Vodafone, the government of India imposed retrospective taxation on Vodafone and say that retrospectively, going from an earlier date, we are increasing the percentage tax on the spectrum that you have bought from us, or the charges, we are increasing the charges. So now you have to pay this much more. So now imagine 10 years back you are telling you have to pay more. So that is sort of a hindrance. These kind of cases is going to hinder other companies coming to India and doing business. So there is still need for some more simplification and streamlining, plus boost the manufacturing. We are exporting a lot, but service export is higher. That's where we have surplus as far as goods are concerned or materials are concerned. We still need to improve. Increase foreign investment. How will that be possible? If we do this, foreign investment would directly increase, right? And encourage the entrepreneurship so that joblessness does not happen or jobless growth does not happen. Jobs, which was a negative, can also get addressed. In addition, increase agricultural productivity. How can we increase? Increasing the involvement of technological advancement, better awareness, better tools, tackles, variety of seeds, etc. Improve the infrastructure. Very important. Invest in education and skills so that the population gets converted into human resource, which will then be helpful for producing more, and promote the exports to get more foreign exchange, as a result of which get all the positive benefits of liberalization that we have already done. So this was about effects of liberalization. Let us look at some of the questions that have been asked in UPSC mains so far. First question, some are very direct, some are indirect. Let us have a look. This question talks about examine the impact of liberalization on companies owned by Indians. So it's a direct question. Are they competing with the MNCs satisfactorily or not? So you have to talk about, because of liberalization, more foreign companies are also coming, increasing the competition. So is Indian industry able to fight them? Not completely, but with some amount of government support. What is that government support? Custom duties, excise duty, etc. imposed on foreign goods, etc. But what if the foreign industry sets up plant in India? Then what happens? So that is going to increase the competition, right? So then the government of India need to maybe provide some subsidies to the Indian domestic companies, right? So it is helping, but of course the liberalization has helped. We also can get better technologies, advancement in technology, etc., but has also increased the competition as well. So both the sides you have to show over here. Next, the public expenditure management is a challenge to the government of India in the context of budget making during the post-liberalization period, clarified. Now here liberalization word is there as such, but you don't have to focus on liberalization here. It is just simply talking about the time period which was post-liberalization. Right, so here as such there is no involvement. This is also important to know, or else you might simply start writing about liberalization only. But let's look at the last question. Last question is, foreign direct investment in the defense sector is now said to be liberalized. Means what? Earlier less percentage was allowed, now more percentage will be allowed. This is a 2019 question. What influence this is expected to have on Indian defense and economy in the short and long run? So in the short run, huge amount of investment, this, that. In the long run, what will happen is, since more investment is going to come, it can help the businesses, but the competition can also further increase. So again, both the sides is what we have to talk about. So this was about the effects of liberalization. Very important. At times UPSC directly picks the key phrases from the syllabus and asks you questions accordingly. Thank you.